Scott Welch, Muscle Insider Magazine. We're here with Shawn Wells, author of The Energy Formula and the top supplement formulator in the industry. I want to ask you a question, just, give it to me straight. What are your favorite supplements? I saw a bunch of them named in here, but let's go through each of these and tell me a bit about them for the consumers out there and obviously people in the industry from your perspective as a formulator. What are your favorite supplements?
I would say my number one, and I know I'm known for this on YouTube and online, is dihydroberberine.
Yeah.
Berberine has been my favorite ingredient for years. I've been keto. I've cared about longevity and worked in not only supplements, but I was a chief clinical dietitian working in acute care and long-term care.
Yeah.
Metformin is probably the most important drug when it comes to anti-aging and for metabolic health. It's an incredible drug. Here's something that you may not know is that before it was discovered to be used for glucose disposal, it was an influenza.
Really?
Yes. And has some potent antiviral activity. So just something to think about.
Wow. Yeah.
In this environment. Just saying. But metformin, again, lowers hemoglobin A1C, lowers insulin levels. So what we see with that is higher GH, higher growth factors, improved telomere length, or at least prevention of shortening, improved methylation when it comes to DNA. All of those kinds of things that we're seeing, reduced CRP and inflammation markers. We're seeing that with metformin, but metformin was recalled last year for being tainted. Metformin has GI distress issues with about a third of the population. Metformin causes B12 deficiency, and it's a drug. And berberine, which is a natural compound that's been used for years in Ayurvedic medicine, Indian medicine, is actually shown head-to-head in a study to be more effective than metformin.
Wow.
Reduced inflammation, reduced dyslipidemia, improved insulin sensitivity head-to-head over metformin. And this has been the default drug for, again, not only diabetes and insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction, but anti-aging. Even people with low hemoglobin A1C levels, even people that are highly insulin sensitive, still see benefit. I'm not even kidding. When I'm talking about like really pushing down insulin, the more you can push it down, the better. And that's what we see is when it comes to anti-aging. So if I know that 87% of the population is metabolically dysfunctional, then metformin or berberine makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
If I know that people are essentially more rapidly aging biologically than chronologically, and we're seeing, not only with ultra-processed food, high glycemic carbohydrate, but you're also seeing the polyunsaturated fatty acid proliferation in the food supply that is potently inflammatory. Things like canola oil and safflower and sunflower, vegetable oil, etc. When you look at ultra-processed food and the damage it's doing, and the fact that we're sedentary, and the fact that we're not fasting like we used to, and the fact that we're not hormetically stressed like we used to be, then that's where being on these compounds can be so potent. The problem with berberine is there's bioavailability issues. You have to take higher doses. You have to take it 3 times a day. There is GI distress for a large part of the population. So what I looked at with dihydroberberine is going to the metabolic downstream metabolite in that pathway that in your gut, berberine is converted to dihydroberberine.
Yes.
And what we see is it's about 5 times more bioavailable on average. And even further, there's certain people that berberine had limited effect on because I think because of their gut microbiota and that they just weren't converting it. So for some people, we're seeing it as high as 30x because they just didn't do a good job with berberine. And so this is one of those cases where that metabolite kind of fixes all the wrongs. And it works for pretty much everyone at doses that instead of 500 milligrams, it's 100 to 150 milligrams. And instead of 3 times a day, it's 2 times a day. So that's where I think everyone should be taking dihydroberberine. It's an incredible supplement. An example of how well it works. People know I'm typically keto, but I do my cyclical ketogenic dieting. I have fun sometimes, and I do have ultra processed foods. And so here's an example of a carbohydrate challenge that was fun. I had 2 double stuffed Oreos. 2 frosted Pop-Tarts and 5 double stuffed Oreos.
Okay,
that was my carb challenge. I was at about a 70 baseline for my blood glucose, using a glucometer, checking every 30 minutes. And without the dihydroberberine, I got up to 199 at 2 hours. With the dihydroberberine, I never got above 100, and I was already coming back down at 1 hour.
So how soon before this swallowing of the carbohydrates would you take it?
Yeah, within 30 minutes. It's either 30 minutes prior or with your meal. I think is it's in that window.
Wow. Okay. Now, in the book also, you're a huge fan of BABA. Let's hear about that.
So BABA is an exercise mimetic.
Okay.
What does that mean? It means it's mimicking exercise. And there's, I think Cardarine is one of the SARMs that's out there, GW 501516, I believe. Anyway, you guys can look it up. Cardarine. And there's been some other ones, AICAR, AICAR. These are mimicking exercise. The cool thing is with L-BABA is this occurs naturally in your body. When you're intensely exercising, L-valine in your branched chain amino acid muscle pool breaks down, it catabolizes and converts into L-BABA. And this tells your body that intense exercise is happening. And now we need to upregulate all of these activities all over the body that are associated with high intensity exercise. So what's cool with elevated BABA in the plasma, it's correlated to improved BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, neuroplasticity in the brain. It's associated with improved bone mineral density, improved muscle mass, reduced fat mass, improved glycogen storage and utilization, improved ketone production and utilization, improved VO2 max, muscle innervation. Like everything that you associate with exercise is associated with BABA. So what's cool is taking BABA with a workout is going to augment every rep, every step. You're going to get more out of that workout. And to me, this is the biggest ingredient since creatine when it comes to exercise performance and the adaptations that you can get.
Now, NMB Nutrition has a format because, not all BABA is the same. Can you explain the racemic mixture, DNLs?
Yeah, exactly. This is the active isomer. This is the L form. So that means it's 2 to 3x better. And also, this is a free acid form. So there's no hydroxide or, sodium or carbonate or, whatever. You're getting concentrated active form BABA, L-BABA. And in the NNB portfolio, it's called MitoBurn.
Yes.
Because it also upregulates mitochondrial function and also brown adipose tissue activation. So you're getting more of that active, metabolically active brown fat that's burning calories.
Now, the mitochondria is the powerhouses of the cell. We all know that. We find this in all the cells here to increase ATP production, shuttle free fatty acids in the mitochondria. We all hear about these things. But you've been a huge advocate about mitochondrial health as kind of that next big thing. Take me through a little bit about that.
Yeah, I believe that mito is the next keto, for sure. When it comes to mitochondrial health, this is, to your point, it's the cellular powerhouse. It's the currency for energy in the body is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And we see that with metabolic dysfunction, with that insulin resistance that I was talking about, like on the berberine, metformin, dihydroberberine discussion, that leads to mitochondrial dysfunction. Metabolic dysfunction leads to mitochondrial dysfunction. And so you're not making enough cellular energy. And in time, that's leading to fatigue and lack of recovery and disease states and higher oxidation, glycation, inflammation. And so you're more rapidly biological aging over chronological aging. You're more rapidly heading towards disease states of all kinds. Almost all disease is metabolic in nature. Maybe 1% is just genetic, inborn in nature. So when you look at cancer, Alzheimer's, coronary heart disease, all of these things are metabolic in nature. And so looking at mitochondrial function becomes essential. And, one of the things you've probably heard about when it comes to mitochondrial function is NAD to NADH ratio.
Yes.
And elevating NAD is what's going to be protecting DNA, is what's going to be the currency for mitochondria to make ATP, essentially. So that's where keeping NAD elevated will lead to proper functioning mitochondria, which leads to more cellular energy, which leads to less disease, less metabolic dysfunction, which leads to less biological aging. And so that's where all of this becomes so important. If you keep the mitochondria functioning well, that's one thing. The other thing is actually mitochondrial biogenesis, so making more mitochondria. And that's where resilience comes in. That's where hormetic stress comes in. Your body, when you put it under the right amount of stress, not too much stress, the right amount of stress, will find ways to make more energy. And one, it's keeping those mitochondria running efficiently, but two, it's making more. And so we see that with hormetic stresses like red light saunas, heat exposure, cold plunges, and then even like contrasting, which is going back and forth between the two, doing things like the ketogenic diet, intermittent and extended fasting. Working out, obviously, especially high intensity interval training. These are all hormetic stresses that, when done in the right way, at the right level, can be things that help your resiliency, help your body's adaptation to become harder to kill. It's called allostatic load, your stress bucket. And the larger that bucket, the more difficult you are to kill, because you have that resiliency, because you have that cellular energy on demand. When you have that small bucket, you have that small allostatic load, when your mitochondria are too low in number and dysfunctional, that's when you're having that brain fog. That's when you're heading into disease states. That's when you have inflammation and glycation, blood sugar damage, and oxidation, essentially rust in our body. All of this is happening because we're not making enough ATP. And that's where, like, for example, the ketogenic diet, when people are metabolically dysfunctional, like I was, can turn the lights back on because they're not used to getting enough glucose into the cell to make enough energy. For the rest of the world, this is not as much of an issue because they're not sedentary. They're not eating 6 times a day. They're not exposed to the polyunsaturated fatty acids we are. They're not exposed to all the high glycemic carbohydrate we are. They're not having glyphosate like we are, and artificial colors, sweeteners, flavors. They're not getting exposed to all this crap that we are. And it's very different. So with our population, this metabolic dysfunction is leading to a lack of energy and running suboptimally. You're putting a lot of pressure on dysfunctioning mitochondria that are too low in number. So that's the big difference. And when you give them ketones, now that's a fuel source they can instantly use. We're meant to be dual fuel. We're meant to be metabolically flexible. You don't have to be full-time keto. This is about metabolic flexibility. And again, that's being harder to kill, that we can tap into either fuel source. But the way that we eat in Western culture is not meant to be metabolically flexible. And that's where you see a lot of our mitochondrial dysfunction. And that's why America, for example, is, I believe, 47th on, health in the world. And we have the number one healthcare expenditure. And we're supposedly the most educated when it comes to the science and all this stuff. And yet we're not healthy. And this is a big reason. When you look at our diet, it's something that's not conducive to metabolic health.
And then we've got things like vitamin D. Obviously, we've been told to stay out of the sun, stay out of the sun.
Yeah.
And that's kind of causes, with COVID, obviously, people have been staying indoors and maybe not going outside as much. Or in some cases, being able to go outside now and getting some sunlight. But tell me a little bit about that in terms of that nutrient and your feelings on vitamin D.
Yeah. If you're not outside for 45 plus minutes, mostly unclothed, below the line of Atlanta, then you're, throughout the year, then you're not getting enough sun exposure. And that's pretty much everyone. And if you're African American, the chances of not getting enough sun exposure for vitamin D synthesis is dramatically worse.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
So yeah, the darker skinned you are, the more difficult it is to convert into active vitamin D.
Wow.
So, that's where we need to educate people that right now about 75, 85% of the population, between the US and Canada is deficient on vitamin D. And we just hear vitamin D and think, oh, it's a vitamin, that doesn't sound that bad. I think it's associated with bone. Vitamin D is a hormone and is responsible for hundreds of things in the body. And it's responsible for, yes, bone, but our immune system, for testosterone and reproductive health, for mood and serotonin, for so many different things that vitamin D, when it's low, much like magnesium, which most of the population's deficient in, and something I really recommend as well, it's the same numbers, about 70 to 85% of the population's deficient in magnesium. These become critical to our health. And we're not getting enough of them. And yes, with COVID in particular, we're seeing that vitamin D can have a massive impact. When you look at the data of those that are not deficient versus those that are, the outcomes are dramatically different when they get COVID. And then the outcomes are different on even getting COVID in the first place. So it's both essentially curative and prophylactic, meaning it can prevent it and help with the cure of it. So it's very important that we look at vitamin D status right now and be taking enough vitamin D. And to me, that's around 5,000 to 10,000 IUs of D3 a day. It's good to get your blood levels checked and verify that, maybe twice a year, 4 times a year, something like that if you can. But that's a good dose to start with.
And that's a fat-soluble vitamin, isn't it? So you're going to be able to store a little bit of it. It's not like a vitamin C where it's kind of flushes out.
Exactly. And you improve the bioavailability of it if you have it with a fatty meal.
Interesting. Okay. Very good. Now, the other one that I saw at Supply Side West this year as well, and it seems to be catching a lot of traction, is the NMN.
Yeah. So going back to mitochondrial health and NNB makes NMN, and that is the one I do prefer, nicotinamide mononucleotide, over true Niacin or nicotinamide riboside. Both of those compounds have been researched to increase NAD levels that we were talking about before, which is going to relate to mitochondrial health, function, energy, anti-aging, so critical across the board. And as we age, NAD levels plummet. Yeah. It sucks, but it's true. Also, NADase, which is also called CD38, the enzyme that breaks down NAD, goes way up. So we're making less NAD and we're breaking it down faster. It's a double whammy. So I do recommend taking NMN, and Rhonda Patrick, Dr. Peter Attia, Dr. David Sinclair all side on the NMN side of the equation over NR. I do recommend taking it, and then also taking some of the polyphenols like quercetin or fisetin is a really good one. I think fisetin is actually the most potent at inhibiting CD38. So it's going to be at that double whammy when you take those two together. I think that would be highly ideal, is to take NMN and fisetin together.
What dose, would you say? Like NMN a day for the average?
So a lot higher than people are probably dosing with. It's expensive.
Yeah.
If you if you take the animal data that's been really compelling, it's more like 1 to 2 grams.
Wow.
And, right now people are probably taking like 100 to 250 milligrams.
Okay.
There is data with NMN at those doses having efficacy. I'm just saying if you look at the animal data, that's like staggering results. I think I would love to see a study using kind of more orthomolecular dosing, as high as 10x of what we've typically been using in studies.
Now, what do you use for dose? Because when I read your book and I saw the amount of things you're on, I'm like, I thought I was a lot into supplements, but I was like, what the heck? And I was like, I had no idea. And I was like, I don't know how many pills you must have. And because you obviously are part owner of NNB, you have access to so much out there on the ingredient side. What would a dose for you look like?
I'm taking twice a day about 1 gram. Yeah. And then, so 2 grams total. And then I'm also taking Fisetin at 500 milligrams twice a day. And Fisetin's not cheap either.
Okay, going through the cabinet.
Wait. I got one more.
Okay,
this one's really interesting is niacin. There's a really compelling study. If you can deal with the paresthesia, the flushing, the burning, looking like you have a sunburn for about 30 to 60 minutes.
The niacin
If you can deal with that, because nicotinic acid, not niacinamide, not inositol hexanicotinate, these non-flush niacins. I think the flush is actually really important. I think when it comes to the data on dyslipidemia, on improving nerve health, and improving vasodilation, especially like with the capillaries at the surface, that flush is actually important. But what was interesting is there's a study where 500 milligrams was used twice a day. So this is a massive dose, and you feel it. You even feel it at 100 milligrams. So you can work up to this. You could take divided doses. You could work up 100, 200, get the 100 milligram caps, take it 3 or 4 times a day. I'm doing 500 milligrams twice a day. The study used healthy young men.
Okay.
And what's cool about that, in this case, this makes the results even more staggering because healthy young men don't have the elevated CD38. They don't have the issues making NAD. They already have good levels.
Yeah.
With niacin at this dose, they had 8x NAD.
Wow.
So I've been taking a lot of niacin, and I look sunburned twice a day. But it's really great. And then if you can deal with this is even more extreme, is I will get in like my sunlight and sauna. I will get in front of a Juve, and get red light on me because you have that superficial blood flow. You have that flushing. You have the activation of mitochondria at the skin surface. And now you're penetrating those mitochondria at a higher level using the red light. I believe that's a potent anti-aging 1-2 punch.
That's incredible. Okay, so let's go through more of the cabinet. What else is in the formulator's cabinet?
Yeah, let's see.
Creatine?
Yes, absolutely. So creatine, I think, is very underappreciated. I think people tend to think of it as a bodybuilding ingredient. They think of it as something for just strength and power, of which it is great, and protecting lean body mass. It's great. I put most of my nursing home when I was a dietitian on creatine just for lean body mass retention, which becomes important as we age. And grip strength is actually one of the top predictors of longevity. So being able to maintain muscle mass as we age and the ability to use that muscle mass well becomes very important. So I love creatine, but it goes way beyond that. It's actually implicated in bone health, in reproductive health, in eye health, brain health. It's potently nootropic. It protects the brain, and it's been studied with traumatic brain injury, just like DHA and fish oil. It's a methyl donor. It's a methylator. So it protects DNA. It's anti-cancer. I actually think creatine should be one of those things that's in multivitamin formulas. I think it's a really important ingredient, especially as we age. As you get over 40 years old, I think everyone should be on this. And right now, it's like an ingredient that 20 to 30-year-old bodybuilding men are on.
Yeah.
And I feel like we need women on this. We need men on this. Women like have a lot of osteoporosis in particular. This can protect against that. Women have higher rates of breast cancer. This can protect against that. The aging brain and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, this can protect against that. So, creatine's one of those ingredients that I think everyone should be on, much like dihydroberberine.
Now, I mean, you are known as the keto guy. Obviously, you brought BHB salts to the market. But one of my favorite products that you helped obviously bring to the market is the CoEnzyme. And that is an MCT powder. And something I didn't know that we discussed several podcasts ago was just that a lot of the MCT powder that's on the market is actually containing maltodextrin. And that's that evil M word that we sort of see, and we see it in gainers, and we see it in things just as the powder that's in MCT powder. But tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's great that you bring that up too, because one, it's ironic to be in a ketone elevating formula to have a high glycemic carbohydrate in there.
Yeah.
But two, like you said, this is kind of the nefarious ingredient that's just added to everything. Chances are it's also GMO. Chances are it has glyphosate. Corn and soy are kind of the two grains, if you will, that are just as as dark as it gets when it comes to health and the impact it's had on our country. So it's great if it obviously doesn't have that ingredient that's a high glycemic carbohydrate. It's great that it doesn't have GMO and glyphosate and all these things. And we're just using pea protein, which has no glycemic impact, and then a tapioca starch that's a resistant starch. So it has no glycemic impact. And it's plated on that. And it's only about 25% of the powder is what it's plated on. And that's to literally powderize in oil so that it has the ability to be a powder and added to other powders or mix in.
Because you have to take the oil and spray it onto the powder so that it becomes a powder.
Exactly. So about 75% of it is the actual C8-MCT. And caprylic acid, the C8-MCT, is the most ketogenic of all the MCTs. So that's exciting too. That has a greater ketogenic effect than having, let's say, coconut oil or a mixed blend of C8 and C10.
Because you have a C6, a C8, a C10, C12, and then you have the long chain fatty acids that are there. What a lot of people don't know is that just taking MCT oil doesn't get you the one that you really want, which is the C8 MCT, which is the fastest burning. I hear C6 is very fast burning, but it really causes a ton of upset in the gut and can go rancid. You start heading down that path towards butyrate, C4, and butyrate is literally the smell that's associated with vomit or rancid dairy. It can get pretty rough taste wise and smell wise. And coenzyme Q10. Okay.
Yeah, so that goes back to mitochondrial health and the electron transport chain. Big fan of CoQ10. I believe that as you get over 40 to 50 years old, you should make sure that you're getting the ubiquinol form, which is a patented form, costs a little bit more. I think it's from Kanika out of Japan. A lot of the research with CoQ10 has been done in Japan, but really important in particular for heart health. Why? Because we think of mitochondria as this powerhouse in the cell. There's one, right? But in very energy-intensive cells, like the cardiocytes, the cardiomyocytes, the heart cells, it's up to 5,000 in there, mitochondria. So that's why we see with some of these mitochondrial ingredients, think like ribose or CoQ10 or PQQ, in particular, they have the biggest impact on cardiovascular health and the heart in particular because it's so mitochondrial dense in heart cells.
Okay. And in terms of things like the average person might be using protein powder and things, are you an advocate or a fan of like whey isolate and things like that? Provided it's not spiked with amino acids, which we've seen in the market. But tell me a little bit about your choices in terms of protein powders and things like that.
Um, I'm a big fan of using whey protein isolate. That's something I've used for years. I love the taste of it. If you're not vegan, I recommend using that. It's highest in the BCAAs, highest in leucine levels. We know leucine drives muscle protein synthesis. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of whey for its functionality, big fan of all the research that exists on it, and a big fan of the taste of it.
Yeah.
And that's important for muscle mass. But I also like adding, and you need at least 25 grams or so to get about 2.8 grams of leucine. Mm-hmm. So that's an ideal dose of whey. But I also like getting 10, 20 grams of collagen in there too. Nice. To support the connective tissue. About a third of the protein in your body is collagen. So we're looking at hair, skin, nails, gut, ligaments and tendons, and all of this connective tissue is collagen. So I like, if you're supporting growth, you're supporting the processes of the body, you're supporting turnover and renewal across the board. You really need both. And if you want strength, you really need both. You need skin strength, you need fascia strength, you need tendon and ligament strength. And so those all become important. I love collagen combined with whey.
What are your thoughts on glycerol? We obviously see a lot of bodybuilders that use this. We see ultra endurance athletes that are using this to sort of stay hydrated. What is your opinion on glycerol? I know that obviously you helped bring some to the market. We could talk about HydroPrime, right? 65% glycerol. What is your opinion on the use of glycerol for sports performance?
Potently hyperhydrating. Mm-hmm. Really interesting ingredient in the way it can really pull fluid into the cell. So you're seeing that volumization, which leads to hyperhydration. Mm-hmm. So where you can essentially exceed the level of hydration you expected, kind of like the idea of, when runners would have more carbohydrate, like before, the carbing up. Yeah. This is kind of like fluiding up, if you will, is using glycerol. And of course, the most pronounced results we see in studies is one with endurance exercise where you're not getting enough hydration, or two, under high heat conditions, especially with endurance exercise where you're not getting enough fluid. We see very dramatic results. So, think of like Ironmen or, triathletes and some of these things, especially when they're in high heat climates and sweating a lot. Yeah. That's where we're seeing dramatic differences. And then some people like the aesthetics of it in terms of, kind of like creatine, kind of like vasodilation, kind of, all that stuff. Like the more swole we look. Yeah. So, your muscles will appear more full when you're on glycerol.
Now, one of the problems I see with glycerol in pre-workout powders, we see it with the stim-containing pre-workouts and then the non-stim pre-workouts, is that we see the clumping happen in that. And, one of the things I like about HydroPrime and V Nutrition is I don't see the clumping happen with that. And tell me a bit about what causes this clumping that we see in pre-workouts for the average person that opens their container.
It's certainly glycerol. I mean, the way it works is it's literally pulling fluid in, like I said. So it's very hydrophilic in the way that glycerol works. So it took us years. I mean, it sounds simple to make something that's high payload in terms of 65%, but also be stable and not clumping, where it's not pulling in fluid. And mix well. Mm-hmm. So that took years of work. But with pre-workouts, you can also have these other ingredients that are very, that have a tendency to pull in fluid as well. Things like citrulline in particular.
Betaine.
Exactly. Yeah. Betaine. There's a number of ingredients that are problematic potentially in pre-workouts. And so when you start combining them, it can be a disaster. And then that's when you're getting into using a lot of silica, and you're using desiccant packs, and the way you condition and blend these ingredients at the contract manufacturer, it can become difficult for sure.
I find it funny because, you have formulated hundreds and hundreds of different products.
Yeah.
And you're not just looking at an Excel document to say, okay, company X is selling the most, and how much betaine do they have? How much beta-alanine do they have? Citrulline have? They have citrulline malate, and they have 6 grams, so I'm going to do 7. And just one up. Once you get these all together, they have different electrical charges, they have different densities that they sink at, they have different abilities to be hydrophobic or hydrophilic, like, hating water, loving water, and it's the whole combination of these things together, the totality of the mixture that has to be thought of. Whereas I find that without the education that some of the supplement company owners may have, and it's not their fault, they're seeing that, hey, if someone else has 300 milligrams of caffeine, I want 310. They just kind of one up it. But there's a right dose based on the research. And then there's let me add a little bit more. And I find it funny when I'll see 2,099 milligrams, and it's like, why that? And they're like, well, it's because, and there's some funny reason why, but there's not really any science behind that.
Yeah, 100%. And, that's a great point, that we need to go back to the science that goes back to being transparent, like we talked about before. I want to see study back doses. And if it starts looking like that, where you have 2,099 milligrams, I'm literally not even looking at that brand, because that seems like a very maverick approach to formulation. 1, I want to be transparent. 2, I want to be compliant. 3, I want to be efficacious. And so it's not about one-upping. I mean, if you want to one-up someone, make a really great formula and then do a study on it. That's one-upping. And if you believe in your product to that degree that you've formulated something great, then put it in a study.
Now, to my knowledge, you're the first one that ever put citrulline malate into a supplement. Also saw other ingredients in there that you were brought into being first. But tell me a little bit more about some of the other first, obviously Theacrine and Dynamine. A lot of them, we see these now everywhere, but you were the one who brought those to the market. Tell me a bit about your feelings on those 2 ingredients.
On Theacrine and Dynamine?
Yes.
They have a place in my heart for sure. They're amazing ingredients that are in hundreds of products. 2 incredible methylxanthines that are in that caffeine family. What we see is less habituation and adaptation, meaning that it works the same way every time you take it, whereas caffeine has diminishing effects. Also, that it works at it doesn't have the impact of you feeling addicted to it and physiologically needing it. There's actually a study with caffeine where, this is with animal models, that by the 3rd day at the same dose, the mice needed that dose to just get to baseline. And so when you see people in line at Starbucks that just need their coffee to get going, it's real. It's not like you're getting, enhanced benefit, to approach your day. You're just needing to get to baseline. You're physiologically addicted to this. But further than that, the half-lives are very unique on Theacrine and Dynamine. So Dynamine is more short-acting, Theacrine is more long-acting, and they can have a really cool effect together in terms of the ratio, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. If you want some all-day formula, you can get fast-acting and long-acting in certain ratios. If you want something that's quick hit, like pre-workout, then maybe Dynamine is more your ingredient. So it's really and we're seeing Theacrine be a little bit more nootropic. So it's fun to be exploring these ingredients right now.
Now, you just brought something up here. We're talking about nootropic, and it was on the Supplement Engineer podcast that you had talked about your preferred stack for nootropics. Take me through, for the average person out there who wants to get a feeling that they can have that sharp mental focus, what would you recommend for some of the ingredients that they should be taking for that?
Theacrine and Dynamine.
Yeah.
My new ingredient that's coming out, the Infinity, the paraxanthine, smokes caffeine, is very nootropic in terms of its dopaminergic response. Along those lines, in terms of dopamine, what would be supportive to that would be something like tyrosine or N-acetyltyrosine. I do like playing with some of the neurotransmitters, particularly acetylcholine. That's kind of at the foundation of any nootropic stack. So that would mean an acetyl donor for acetylation, like acetyl L-carnitine.
Yeah.
That would mean a high bioavailability choline that would pass the blood-brain barrier, like alpha GPC.
Yeah.
And then lastly, something that, maybe not overusing this ingredient, that inhibits acetylcholine esterase, like huperzine A. That would kind of be the ultimate stack to elevate acetylcholine levels that you need more when you're focused. Beyond that, there's an ingredient that I really like for serotonin. That's a canna extract. That's a natural SSRI. It's called Zembrin.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of that one. And then adding to that would be like 5-HTP to support serotonin synthesis. And actually D3 is important for that process as well. And then saffron is a really good herb for serotonin modulation. And beyond that, it's kind of gray market, but if I was to pick one raced ham, a Noopept is one I'm a big fan of. It's only 10 to 30 milligram dose. And I think that's kind of it that's coming to mind right now.
What was interesting about that interview on the Supplement Engineer podcast is you talked about if you get it wrong and you're putting too much of this, say it's a dynamine and theacrine together, and you don't get that right, you can kind of screw up the effects.
Yeah.
It has to be a specific dose and ratios to each other. And that's where someone with your background comes in to obviously get that kind of balance correct. It's not just about putting more than the next guy, because you could actually cause the opposite effect.
Yeah, it's about understanding the interplay between the ingredients, the pharmacodynamics, as well as the pharmacokinetics, meaning like how it reaches plasma and what that curve looks like. So you have to understand their interplay and then how they get absorbed. So that's two very different things, and you need to take that into account when you're formulating. And you're right, some people are just throwing in X dose of these ingredients and trying to one-up the other guy, but that's not what optimization is. That's not what the science is. So that's where a formulator can be helpful.
New trend that I'm seeing here, and you touched about this in your book, is you have prebiotics, but you also have postbiotics. Take us through the difference between a prebiotic, probiotic, and postbiotic.
Yeah, actually where I am right now is I don't know that I'm the biggest fan of probiotics, and I've said I like them in the past, but I might take a spore-based, a very stable probiotic. But I think typically probiotics, which supposedly supports the gut microbiota, the flora that's in the gut, the bacteria that's in the gut. But the doses needed, the stability needed, the ratio needed of certain strains, what your strains are in your gut currently based on where you've been, what you've eaten, antibiotics and your health and whether you exercise. And it's so complex and it's ever changing based on resilience, based on what you need at that point, based on your diet there, based on the other people that you're around, or there's so much complexity to what's going on in the gut that I don't know that, just taking a probiotic is actually that impactful. What I think is far more strategic, so I'm not anti-probiotic, but it's not as compelling right now. We need a lot more data. What I think is more compelling is taking a prebiotic, which is typically these short chain fibers that feed the bacteria.
Yeah.
But to me, my favorite one is actually something called a phage. That's like Deerland Enzymes has worked on this, and it's called Pre4 Pro, and it feeds the good bacteria while helping to kill out the crowding of the bad bacteria. So it's creating space for that good bacteria. So that one's kind of the most potent of all the prebiotics that I know of. And sometimes some people have GI distress with certain prebiotic fibers. But interesting, like you're saying, postbiotic is butyrate.
Yeah.
The whole point of these bacteria is that they ferment and then they create this short chain fatty acid that is the fuel for the gut. That's actually can convert into beta hydroxybutyrate,
Yeah.
potentially ketones. And so, if we look at this short chain fatty acid, butyric acid, butyrate, in particular, the physiologic form is typically sodium butyrate. Then we're seeing that it will enhance gut function. It will enhance health across the board. As we know, the gut is implicated in, the majority, the lion's share of neurotransmitters. It's associated with the lion's share of your immune system. And we keep finding out more and more that the gut's responsible for. So it makes sense to supplement, in my mind, with more butyrate. And in particular, we're seeing the most bioavailable form be a triglyceride form of butyric acid that has that glycerol backbone, and that would be tributylin.
Okay. Now, obviously, the type of diet that you're on will obviously have to be matched to the supplements you're on. If you're on a low carb diet, then you'd create a supplement stack that kind of complements that, or if you're in an isocaloric diet or et cetera. But for people out there, what would you say is the prescription to say, okay, these are the things that, regardless of the diet you're on, these are the things that you might want to add to your diet that you think across the board would help most people? Is that too loaded of a question? I know you're a scientist. I'm trying to sort of make it easy for people to say, I got to go out and I got to get on this. I got to get on Beba. I have to get, GlucoVantage. I have to get, what would you say is sort of the takeaway that the average person should look at for their stack?
Let's see. I think, like I said, the glucose disposal agent of dihydroberberine, I think everyone should be on. If you're keto, it's going to be effective. If you're type 2 diabetic, it's going to be effective. If you're, someone who's, neither of those, it's going to be effective. It's just effective across the board for anti-aging and metabolic health. Creatine. Sure. Again, I think supplementing your protein levels, again, with whey protein or a vegan protein source that's high enough in leucine. Maybe you need to add fermented BCAAs to that or something. And collagen, if, again, you're not vegan, having collagen. And I think beyond that, one of the things we didn't get into is the methylated coenzymated B vitamins. Many people have issues converting these B vitamins to their active form, in particular those that have the MTHFR gene. They don't convert folic acid all the way over to 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. So you can end up being anemic despite having enough folic acid in your diet, either as a supplement or food. Methylcobalamin's the active form of B12, and the form I prefer. I think, again, taking the pre and postbiotic. I like taking the C8, in the morning in particular. I think it's great for brain energy. CBD is one that I did not talk about, and I think that the endocannabinoid system is very underappreciated as the master regulator system. People know, like doctors in particular, are specializing, as a cardiovascular doctor, neurological doctor, whatever. They're into all these systems, and yet this master regulator system associated with mood and inflammation and pain and neurotransmitters is not being accounted for, and whether there's deficiencies in the endocannabinoid system. And that's why we see with CBD or THC or CBG or CBN, we're seeing people, when they use the right doses, the right forms, the right blends, sometimes they get very dramatic results in inflammation, in pain, in mood. And so that's something that I think a lot more exploration needs to be done in. But the pharmacological impact of, the physiologic impact of, can't be underestimated. And probably lastly is I'm a huge fan of adaptogens, going back to the idea of resilience and the allostatic load, our stress bucket.
Yeah.
The reason that these adaptogens are so good at helping us adapt and normalize and optimize is because of they're helping us have greater resilience to stress to the body. And so that's what you see, is that whether you're hypo or hyperglycemic, whether you're hypo or hypertensive or whatever it is, it tends to normalize us. Whether you're overstimulated or tired, it tends to give us the right amount of energy. It's being in that optimal zone where you have a greater resilience, greater stress capacity, and everything just functions better. So I'm a huge fan of like ashwagandha, rhodiola, lion's mane, these kinds of things.
Phenomenal. There you guys have it. You're getting it right from Shawn Wells, the ingredientologist. Check out his new book, The Energy Formula, where he goes into even more detail, some of these things in there. You got to try. Check it out at ShawnWells.com.